an expression of the concern of Kenyans. So we address it as concerns that we want to speak to and our reflection upon on those concerns. Number two, we have some matters that we raise that are related to the same concerns that might also guide in the decision that will come thereof. And finally, we have a number of recommendations that we want to make so that we are part of the solution. And with your permission, Chair, I'll request the Bishop Chairman of the Interreligious Dialogue and Ecumenism Commission of the conference to present our memorandum on behalf of the Chairman. Thank you.
Yes, please. I'll take the floor. Thank you, Chair and members of this ad hoc committee and all the religious leaders present here this morning. First, I want to express the apology of our Chairman, Most Reverend Martin Kivuva, who will not be with us this morning. And what I'm going to present is the collective views of the entire Commission. Memorandum to the Senate Ad Hoc Committee to investigate the proliferation of religious organizations and the circumstances leading to the deaths of more than 95 people in Shakaola, Kilifi County. Preamble. Honorable Chair and members of the Senate Committee, we Kenyan Catholic bishops do express our appreciation for the invitation to make this presentation before this Honorable Committee of the Senate. In the first place, we join the government and the people of Kenya in condemning the actions that led to the deaths of more than 95 Kenyans in Shakaola, Kilifi County. As we wait for the comprehensive report about the happenings that led to losses of lives and many people, we believe that this was an isolated case that should be handled as a criminal act within the laws of the land and in an exhaustive manner. It is our hope and prayer that the government of Kenya will bring the investigation into this matter to an exhaustive conclusion that will leave no questions unanswered. Number two, concern of the government of Kenya regarding proliferation of religious organizations. As we are all aware, Kenya is a God-fearing nation. This is the premise upon which the Kenya Conference of Catholic Bishops want to appreciate the healthy relationships that have always existed between the church and the state. As a result of this healthy relationship, both the government and the church have had very meaningful engagements in the promotion of the common good. This is evident in the promotion of values, engagements in the education and health sector, and the integral development of our people. We like to reinstate that one of the key principles that has always guided such engagement is the principle of separation of powers between the church and the state. B, in addition to this, we make reference to the supreme law of the land and reiterate that as provided for in our constitution, the Kenyan government has a sacred duty to protect and guard the right of freedom of conscience, religion, beliefs, and opinion of its citizens as stated in Article 32 of the Constitution of Kenya 2010 through regulation. Article 32 provides inter alia, 1, every person has a right to freedom of conscience, religion, thought, belief, and opinion. 2, every person has a right either individually or in community with others, in public or in private, to manifest any religion or belief through worship, practices, teachings, and observance, including observance of a day of worship. 3, a person may not be denied access to any institution, employment, or facility, or enjoyment of any right because of the person's belief or religion. 4, a person shall not be compelled to act or engage in any act that is contrary to the person's belief or religion. C. It is important to note that governments elsewhere have tried to regulate the churches. The same has had disastrous consequences. A case at point is as follows. In his extensive effort to construct an ideologically integrated Zairean state from 1965 onwards, the head of state, President Mobutu Sese Seko, launched various laws to restrict the activities of religious groups. The new law of December 31st, 1971, regulated public worship and conditions for recognition as a legal religious institution in Zaire. Regulation 63, the effect of the law was to break down the historic monopoly of the Roman Catholic Church as a partner of the state, according to the agreement that had been reached between King Leopold II and Rome in 1906. Regulation 64, the new law granted legal status to 3 established churches and ignored the Islamic community. As Shakaola Biaya states, his law granted the state the power and the monopoly of recognition of religious institutions, of control over public worship, and the power to suspend or ban any church when this institution troubled the security or established order. Regulation 65, regular censures were also instrumental. In this regard, Biaya observes that never newer independent churches were, for the most part, docile and submissive, as compared to the tense relationship between the major established churches and the state. In the early 1970s, several local Pentecostal churches were suspended. Some resisted the law by adjusting their forms and places of worship. Eventually, some succumbed to the state pressure and provided legal representation in 1978. As in other parts of Africa, both Jehovah's Witnesses and Seventh-day Adventists suffered years of harassment form of the regime. In his effort to secularize the state through the politics of authenticity and subvert the power of Zairean religious organizations, Mobutu adopted a number of hegemonic strategies, such as forcing the unification of Protestant churches into one single organization known as Christian Community of Zaire in 1969, and similarly for Islamic Community of Zaire in 1972. Both bodies were led by Mobutu allies, and their activities were restricted to conversion, social welfare, public health, and education. The Catholic Church, demographically and politically more powerful through its school system and youth movements, was more severely treated than the Kimbastu Zairean largest independent church and Protestant churches. Having given the above illustrations, we also mention the following countries where the government has invested in regulation of religions. These include, but not limited to, China, Eritrea, Russia, Vietnam, Singapore, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Tunisia. We therefore ask this honorable committee to make references to the same and see whether our government wants to go the same way. D, further to the aforementioned historical facts, it is our considered opinion that regulating churches is discriminatory and tends towards singling out specific religions or faith formation. This runs contrary to Article 27 of the Constitution of Kenya and protects equality and freedom. While the country has witnessed so many attacks and killings as a result of violent religious extremists, the religious affiliation of the perpetrators has never been in question. Rather, they were dealt with as isolated cases by individuals and criminal groups. E, It is also paramount to recall here that Article 8 of the Constitution of Kenya 2010 provides that there should be no state religion. In keeping to the letter and spirit of this provision, we wish to raise a caution that regulation of religion by the government runs the risk of violation of this constitutional provision. The question of who will regulate and how the same will be done raises a number of issues. For instance, given that majority of the Kenyans subscribe to one religion or the other, the regulator is bound to be a member of a particular religion. This means that eventually a member of one religion will dictate the activities of another religion, thus affecting the freedom of the minority religions as well as the group that will probably refute the regulation for one reason or the other. Having this in mind, our considered opinion is that if the state goes the way of regulation of religious organization, it may portray itself as being in favor of one religion or the other. We revert to attempts by other countries cited above, and especially the 3 African countries. Number 3, related matters to be considered. A, administration and organization. We wish to inform this honorable committee that most, if not all, of the religious organizations subscribe to a specific mode of administration and organization vastly different from the others, mostly because they are heavily informed by their religious beliefs and tenets. This means that it will be very difficult to come up with a common regulation that aligns with all the religious organization practices. This will also raise the question of the relationship between the state and the religious organization, international structures, since most of the religious groups are tied to their global umbrella organization outside the country. A case at point is the Catholic Church, which is an international organization governed by a common law and discipline. B, the risk of politicization and manipulation of religion. Based on the above and having carefully made a comparative study of countries where government has invested in regulation of religious organizations, we want to convince this committee and ourselves that efforts towards regulation of religious organization in Kenya will very likely will open up the different religions to manipulation by different groups, especially politicians, who will likely attempt to control the activities of the various religions to fit their interests. Refer to the case of Zaire, for example. Further, it is important to note that the government already has mechanisms to address many emanating issues as a result of religion. We make reference to the following. Mechanism 1, the National Security Force is vested with investigatory powers to review each case on its merit and through the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution to initiate prosecution of individuals who misuse the right of freedom of religion. This has happened in the past in respect to violent radical groups. The second mechanism is the existence of the Register of Societies in Kenya. And third mechanism, the existence of different well-organized umbrella bodies for different religious organizations in Kenya, e.g. Kenya Conference of Catholic Bishops, National Council of Churches in Kenya, Supreme Council of Muslims in Kenya, Evangelical Alliance of Kenya, Hindu Council of Kenya, etc. Number 4, recommendations. Considering that there was massive security failure in preventing Shakaola massacre, and that the same government has lost the moral authority to investigate the matter, we call on the government to make deliberate effort to restore public trust, which has been massively eroded by the Shakaola massacre. B, considering the length of time this matter has taken and the number of deaths so far reported, we ask the government to come out clearly and state whether there were no non-religious actors in the massacre and whether the killings were only for religious reasons. C, the state actors shun from interference with religious matters and use of religion for political reasons. We strongly note that state actors have no authority to convene or finance interfaith gatherings or formation. D, the national security agencies become more proactive in addressing issues of insecurity and criminal acts in the country. E, that the government seeks to collaborate more and more with different umbrella bodies of the religious organization in Kenya for purposes of promoting a collaborative self-regulating mechanism by religious organizations in Kenya. Such collaboration will require reference to umbrella bodies before any religious group is registered. F, that the Register of Societies in Kenya should play its rightful role by ensuring that before registering any religious organization, due diligence and background checks and references are made. In conclusion, we wish to thank you, Honorable Chairman, and the members of the committee for inviting us. We express our sympathies and solidarity of prayers to all those who have lost their loved ones in Shakaola and pray for the repose of the souls of our dear brothers and sisters who lost their lives as a result of the criminal act in Shakaola. Our hope and prayer is that the government seeks to do justice and that the right to religious freedom and the principle of separation of powers between state and the church shall be upheld. Signed by the Chairman, Kenya Conference of Catholic Bishops, on the 9th June 2023. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, my Lord Bishop. So I think we now come to the end of the presentations. I want to inform the gathering that the Honorable Senator Munyifaki has joined us. Mohamed Faki has joined us. Senator from Mombasa is a member of this committee, has joined us online. The Honorable Senator Tabitha Mutinda has also joined us online. So we now want to interact with you based on your reports and on any other issues so that we can see where we go from here. And I'll have a first bite, then we'll go to the Honorable Senator Cheptumo, and then we will go to the Vice Chair and the others who are online. Now, the church in Kenya, and I say this with a lot of humility because the biggest representation is here. So I can confidently say I'm addressing the church in Kenya. I think the church seems to be saying that this should be treated as an isolated issue and that there was a failure by the security organizations within the country. I wanted to just ask, when we were hosting the Attorney General here and also the Registrar of Societies when they were here, I want to hear your views. They said most churches that are operational right now are not compliant. They are not filing their returns. They are not doing what they said they would do when they were given the registration. And that if they were to strictly effect the law, then many of the churches will be suspended and they would be stopped. And suspension means that the government will have to send officers, police officers, to those churches and say, you are not complying, therefore don't open church. I just wanted to hear your views whether you would be comfortable with that, if you will be happy for such a drastic action to be taken. You know, our neighbors here in Rwanda, they closed 6,000 churches at a go. And in Kenya, we were told by the Registrar of Societies, many of the church organizations, some of the very big church organizations, in fact, have not complied. And the Archbishop here told us that he's satisfied that if we enforce the Societies Act, he will be comfortable with that. So I wanted a confirmation. Would you be happy if one of our recommendations today, my Lord's Bishop, is that government, if the Senate is to recommend that government should immediately, upon this report being implemented, go and implement strongly the Societies Act and possibly suspend operations of all churches that have not filed returns. They are not doing what they said they would do when they were given. Would you be happy with that? And then I also wanted a confirmation whether this Paul Mackenzie, was he a member of any of these umbrella organizations that you represent? Was he a member of any? And if he was, what disciplinary or what peer action did you apply if he was a member? And assuming he wasn't a member, what other thing did you do that, or, because we can't say, you know, that is the police, but this is your member or a non-member but preaching the gospel in his own maybe wrong way. Did you take peer action, collective action against him to prevent the deaths that have occurred? Whether he was a member, if he was, then maybe you have a higher responsibility. If he wasn't, you still have the peer responsibility. Did you take any action? And if not, what do you think should be done to people who are obviously preaching a different gospel? Because when you look at his clips at the beginning, he was preaching Jesus. He was preaching conversion. He was preaching that Jesus will come again. In fact, fasting is one of the things we do as Christians. But then towards the end, the thing changed. What do you think we should do when such things are happening? Which brings me to my third question. A church is registered to preach the gospel, and then somewhere along the way it is changing. So would you be comfortable with Senate recommending that we should have state agents, like you say, of the criminal justice system, to be monitoring all churches, so that when they start changing, we can take action before anything happens? What do you think of these three questions? I just want to open it up, and then maybe you can tell us whether you think this is wrong and what, and then my colleagues will pick it up from there. I'll just leave it free so any one of you can start, or maybe you can just indicate if you want by pressing the mic. You can ask for the mic.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the feedback you have given and to the expression of some of the questions. One is to start that I'm not aware that Mackenzie was a member of the Evangelical Alliance of Kenya. His institution, I don't know whether it's the good news or something else, they were not members. But perhaps some technical input so that the committee is more informed is that people who end up the way Mackenzie has ended tend to operate in isolation, and they rarely will associate. So it's the first sign that you notice and say, this is not right.
because in the Christian faith, as it were, the Christian body is so much prescribes interdependence of members. And so relationships are strong and affirmed in the Christian faith. So if somebody is propagating a Christian faith and they promote isolation, it's a sign that the path may not be right. But however, for us, we cannot stop them because, Chair, we adopted a constitution that is fairly liberal in terms of the Bill of Rights. And so sorry, nobody can say stop worshipping. The best EAK can do is to say you are no longer our member if you are a member. But that does not stop the person from worshipping because, I mean, they have rights to associate and to worship. Next is to say that it will be injurious, extremely, if your recommendation will include a statement that let's implement the Societies Act as is to the letter without providing a transitional period and clause. I think it's important that organizations, people that have taken responsibility to go and register organizations, that they bear responsibility for the decisions they made to register institutions. But to the extent that we want to be redemptive and not punitive to these individuals and to these organizations, I think it would be important that there is a provision of a transitional clause where amnesty is given and say up to June 2024, ensure that you have become compliant to A, B, C, D if you registered an institution under the Societies Act. And let it not just be religious institutions. There may be other institutions also, I mean, that are registered. And sometimes people just go there as hawkers, to go and register and wait for somebody to come and buy. They're traders, and so it should not be isolated, but it should be something that is universal, that deals with all the others, but provide a transitional clause that allows amnesty. Next is to your other question about whether there was any peer mechanism. I alluded that in 2019, some of our leaders approached this gentleman, told him what you're doing and preaching is not right, because children were stopping to go to school out of his preachings, and some others about health care. And when this did not work, they went to Malindi and reported. And Malindi police, first of all, to the children's officer in Malindi. And the children's officer actually took action. And it's the children's he doesn't follow that path. But then that is how far we can go. The rest of it remain to be criminal. It's not now even in the Societies Act. It becomes a matter of the Penal Code. It becomes a matter of the Children's Act implementation. And so it goes beyond the Societies Act. And so there are many other people that try to help. What should we do to people who preach different gospel? So long as it does not infringe on other freedoms, there isn't much that we can do. We can only intervene when it begins to infringe on other rights of people. Education, health, shelter, food, right to own property, and all those type of things. So if there's a door for us to be able to intervene, then it is possible. But just for the sake that they are preaching a different gospel, it's not criminal to say something that you disagree with the Bible. That would be a different gospel. It's not a criminal act, and Christians will not come with stones to stone you or to remove you from preaching what you are saying, because you have a right to express yourself in the manner that you express, so long as you're not hurting other people. Putting people to monitor. The Evangelical Alliance of Kenya will say government should not put people to monitor, but that through an empowered structure for umbrella bodies, so that then it's more a peer mechanism. Because it's me who can understand whether somebody has stopped becoming evangelical. Government will not understand in the objectives. If the objective says to preach the gospel of Christ, there is no government monitor who will appreciate what that is, ideally. It's only these people here who might be able to appreciate what it means. So it is us who can be able to do that, but then the registrar of society is supported by ourselves to be able to say this person is moving away from the objectives. Maybe they need to create other objectives for what they are constituted to do. And that's why we are proposing a mechanism that we have proposed in our recommendation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't know whether you want to add before we ask other questions. Yes, I'll give you, and then Bishop Kinda.
I just want to add that the question of filing returns, I think there is a clear mechanism where a specific church is not filing returns, that they are notified, and they're given a period to file, and therefore will be more comfortable that rather than generalize, that you deal with the specific cases, because some of us are hearing it for the first time, that there are churches that do not file returns. But I want to mention also something that was mentioned by one of our colleagues earlier, the competence of those who investigate religious matters. It is very clear that the investigating arm of the government may not have the competences required, for example, in religious studies or in theology. Take an example of a preacher who tells followers not to take their children to school and claims to be a Christian preacher. Already, our Lord Jesus Christ mandated his followers to go out and teach. And that is where the mandate of churches getting involved in education emanate from. Now, anybody who comes up and says education is an abominable activity, it does not need the rocket science to see how that preacher is deviating from the core teaching of Christianity. As a matter of fact, I would like to mention to this ad hoc committee that the reason why Mackenzie left Malindi and went to Shakaola was precisely because of the pressure, not only from the state agencies, but also from the fellow religious leaders. And before he went to Shakaola, he actually tried to establish himself in Shakadulo. And in Shakadulo, in one of his preachings, he began telling women who are frequenting his church that some form of dress and how they dressed as women is not in keeping with Christianity. And he went further even to describe how women should even dress and appear in public. And this infuriated the community. And worse, when he said to the students not to go to school. Actually, it's the community which decided to close his church in Shakaola, in Shakadulo, and that's why he ended up going to Shakaola. So he was neither a member of any of the umbrella bodies, neither was he accepted by the community. I also want to mention that without the necessary competences, it is very difficult to regulate religious beliefs and practices. Take an example of Mackenzie telling his followers that you have to fast and die in order to see Jesus. Now, nobody can actually prove whether those who have died have not seen Jesus. Just to show you how difficult it can be for a non-religious actor to be able to separate beliefs that are acceptable to Christianity and those which are not. And that's where we are still emphasizing that self-regulation by church organizations themselves are more likely to succeed than any other mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you. Bishop Okindo.
Thank you, Chair. I want to appreciate your 3 questions which you've posed to us as religious leaders. I want to begin with the last one, and you said, assume that one is registered and mid-course they turn away from following what is expected of them. This is where the umbrella bodies come handy, because with umbrella bodies, before we admit a member, there is a process. This process is handled by a team known as membership committee. The role of the membership committee, and I'm talking from the National Council of Churches perspective, which I want to believe is shared with quite a number of umbrella bodies. EAK, I can see sector is saying yes. The membership committee, one, they receive an application from the prospective member or the one who is applying to become our member. Within that time, they will have to attach what we call the tenets of faith. What do they believe? This committee will go through this. They will even tell us the approximate number of their branches countrywide. So it is an elaborate process by which we will be able to look at the statement of faith, because every now and then, the leaders of these organizations, whom we call the heads of churches, they meet from time to time. And it is this time that we can be able to interrogate them if they are still working within the tenets of faith which they deposited to us. But if we find that they are running away, now that is the time that we counsel them, we advise them, and then we bring them back to where they are supposed to be. So this is why we are proposing that when we regulate ourselves, because we know what we had agreed with them in terms of faith and in terms of conduct, then we'll be able to detect it in good time. The challenge we are facing with the Shakaola situation, and Mackenzie in particularly, is that we don't know if he ever went into any umbrella body. And this is something that we are developing interest to know. Because if the answer is no, then we are telling ourselves that let's emphasize in this so that nobody comes without entering into recognized umbrella bodies where they are accountable, where they are responsible, where there are checks and balances. And this we can do for you because the government cannot do this. This will be too much for you, running into each and every village trying to find out what is this church doing. But because our structures, as you saw in our statement through the chair, we have ourselves from the ward level, the sub-county level, the county level, the regional level, and the national level. Nobody who comes to our umbrella bodies will escape scrutiny.
And this is why we suggest that if this committee will recommend that we continue to do this, but we bring the new entrants into existing umbrella bodies as it was suggested. Question number 2, allow me just to touch briefly. I know that there are members who would want to touch it. You said, if Mackenzie was a member of your umbrella body, then with what he has done, what would you have done? I think that's a very valid question. In each and every group, there is a disciplinary action. And that involves so many things. One, to bring and counsel, help to bring them back, but also there is expulsion. If we realize that is a rogue, and a rogue indeed, then we have a choice to expel them out of the body. But that we will do after we've attempted to bring them back based on the statement of faith which they had deposited with us. You asked question 1 that you are here with the Attorney General and Registrar, and they are saying now there are so many churches that are not sending their returns. This is shocking to us because we know that all our registered churches are required by law to do annual general assemblies every year, and that's a requirement. But even before you do annual general assembly, you will have to write to the registrar and give the intention of the dates by which you will do your annual general assembly. Immediately after each annual general assembly, you do the returns. You do the returns. And if there are any who are not doing returns, I wonder what has happened. Why were they not followed? Honorable Chair, remember that the church galvanizes itself to start, but the church is registered by the state. So we all work together with the state. There is a role of the state and there is a role for the church by which we represent. So there must be some breakdown in between the state and the churches because they have all the contacts. All the contacts. They know where the heads of the churches are. For example, I'm the head of PEFA churches in Kenya. All my details are there. The detail of my deputy is there. The details of general secretary is there. So there are structures which we want to pray that in future maybe we enhance those structures and make sure that everything is followed. Thank you, Chair.
So would you support, you know, a drastic action or not? Just
I don't want to support drastic action because we as churches have the mandate and the ability to follow that on behalf of the government because these are people that report to us.
Okay. Maybe before Senator, we just have a quick one. Then Lord Archbishop can finish and then we come to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. My name is Reverend Canon Chris Kinyanjui, General Secretary of NCSK. I want to answer your question number 1. You said that the Attorney General and the Registrar of Society said that many churches have not, or religious organizations have not complied. I think it will be good to follow up and see who are those that have not complied. In NCSK, we have 32 member churches and 18 organizations, and we have given you a list. All of them have complied, and this is something that we have a capacity building program to make sure that the governance of our churches is up to the next level. We have theological colleges where we train our people to avoid this kind of doctrinal challenges that emerge once organizations are registered. So from that admission by the Attorney General, I hope the committee can see where the gap is. So we have a law, which is the Societies Act, which is very comprehensive, and I hope the committee goes through the provisions of the Societies Act. It may be needing a bit of alignment with the new constitution, but it has a very good system and mechanism of regulating societies, of which the faith sector registers under. So the AG is admitting that they have not been enforcing it. And I know there could be reasons why they have not been doing that. I wouldn't go for a drastic action because that will be counterproductive. I think at the end of the day, what we are saying as the faiths, we want compliance with the existing law. As NCSK, we believe that if the Societies Act is effectively implemented by the Registrar of Societies, that some of these problems will not even be there, at least at the legal side, because we have two levels of mischief. There is the legal policy, but then there is the doctrinal. On the legal policy framework, the government and the state apparatus has competence. And the Societies Act is one mechanism that is already there, that on admission of the AG is not effectively being implemented. I wish it is implemented. I don't wish for drastic action, but let there be a process to make sure that there is compliance. The other mischief is on the doctrinal side. And I think all of us are agreed the state does not have competence to test the doctrine that are being taught in our churches or religious places of worship. And that is where we are saying a self-regulation mechanism will be effective. And Chair, I want to take the members of this committee back to the 1960s. We never had proliferation of churches in the 60s. We never had mushrooming churches in the 70s. Even in the 80s. The problem that we are having now actually started in the 90s. And we all know the history of Kenya, what happened in the 90s. In 1988, NCSK was in a conference somewhere in KU, and the ruling party then, KANU, was meeting somewhere, I think, in Kasarani. And they passed a resolution that the elections in Kenya will be done through Mlolongo, the queuing system, that there will be no secret ballot in Kenya. That is part of the history of this country. So the NCSK meeting discussed that resolution of the meeting of the ruling party. Remember that time, KANU was a state party. Everybody was a member of KANU. NCSK came out and said no to Mlolongo. And we called for the reinstatement of the secret ballot. What happened after that is that NCSK was received a lot of attacks from the state and from KANU, and some of our religious leaders had to take cover because they had taken a stand against the government of the day. The state went ahead and encouraged some churches to issue another statement saying that there are some churches that support Mlolongo. I don't want to mention the churches, but I can give you a list. They actually left the membership of NCSK and supported the government in the Mlolongo system. And that is where another organization was formed to actually be the counter of the National Council of Churches of Kenya. This is history of part of this country. So what happened then after that was that we continued as NCSK to ask for multi-party, because now the country was in danger by the ruling party. And in 1992, if you remember, there was a series of several things that happened: the civil society, the political actors, and the MPs. Political rallies were banned. So where were politicians meeting? In our churches. That's where they could speak freely. That is also part of our history that has led us to this proliferation. So in 1992, again we had the multi-party. So to show up the numbers of churches that were supporting the state, in the 60s and 70s and 90s, churches that were being registered, we could get a confidential letter from the registrar to do vetting. So if Ezekiel, for example, was requesting to be registered, we'll be able to vet who is he. And we had mechanisms because we have church leaders across the country. and will be able to give a confidential report to the registrar and recommend yes or no. And that way, we were able to avoid the kind of circumstances that we have now. And in the 90s, that is when we started talking of mushrooming of churches. It was the registrar who actually opened the floodgates of registration of as many churches as possible, basically that were going to support the state. And we know why, because we know that the 1990s, how they were. As we went to the 2000, there was actually a moratorium, Chair, stopping further registration of churches. I'm sure this committee is aware, and I know we haven't spoken about it, and I hope at a certain point we can discuss that too. The state decided these churches are too many, will not register more. During the last year of the former President Uhuru Kenyatta, we had a meeting to discuss the lifting of the moratorium against registration of churches in this country. And it was agreed, there was a framework that was agreed. I don't want to take too much time of this committee, but that's something that we can brief you. But basically, we vouched for self-regulation under the umbrella bodies. So what I'm saying is, let the state keep away from religion. Let us respect Article 8. State and religion are separate. What happened in Shakaola was not a religious affair. It was a completely criminal affair. And I know you have asked the other question, did we reach out? Yes, we did. I can tell you our committee, our county coordinating committee in Kilifi, has discussed this matter many times, has discussed this matter with the government officials. And we expected action. Unfortunately, our criminal justice system failed this country on Shakaola. And I want this committee, and I wish this committee can actually be able to pin this issue where it belongs. This Shakaola matter is a criminal issue. It is not even a religious issue. And therefore, if we can get a framework for self-regulation, we have the competence to deal with issues of doctrine, which the state does not have. That's an addition I wanted to add. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Bishop, you still want the floor, or we? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. In addition to what our General Secretary has said, I've remained with only two remarks. One, it's like when you asked that question about whether we would support the drastic measure, it echoes in our minds that very good relationship with the state. And I think it is dangerous in one way or the other. And state categorically that church teaches obedience to the law. What does the law say is what the Christian should do. What the law says is what the church organizations should do. And therefore, we feel as much as we ask for amnesty, we want to enforce, because the church works in collaboration with the state to ensure peace, to ensure unity of that so-called state, which is a society united, and the church is also to facilitate that love of Christ as a recipe to make the state peaceful, united, and cohesive. That is where we come and say and join hands with the government to deal with matters like we are doing now. So on my side, I want to say, okay, we cannot ask for that corporal punishment, as you are saying, but with an amnesty, we can allow churches to come back and fulfill requirements. that are according to the law. Because the law here has a role to play as much as the church as well. But you can find these guys are passing in between. In between. They are somewhere, then you cannot catch them well. And in that margin line where they are is what we are terming as criminal. In Rwanda, where my church have churches in Rwanda, when the government wanted to clean up the church, they closed the churches. And my churches were closed.
Including your churches?
Yeah? Including your churches? Including my churches.
That is the
African Brotherhood Church.
African Brotherhood Church. Okay.
Then we were told, okay, guys, because some of these churches are foreign, like ABC is a foreign church from Kenya. They said, here is a guideline. This is what we want to see fulfilled as a government, so that the registrar can look at it and say, you can qualify. And that is what we went through. And that is why I would recommend that the government should not run away from this. It is the responsibility of the government to ensure that all organizations in this country work according to the law. Where they needed amnesty, for example, they said, okay, now a minimum qualification for someone to open a church in this country is a degree in a minimum in theological education. That is the only person who can register there. And now you see they are giving direction, because they are saying, such a guys are coming in here and saying, the Spirit has told me. They said that is not enough. So we cannot agree to this. We want someone who has gone to school even and come up with a certificate to show, and that he has been trained on ABCD, and therefore he qualifies. And then they were given, like my pastors there, only one was at a degree. The others were diplomas. And we are given an opportunity now to upgrade the diplomas, because the government is not after the church to close. They want to help them to become clean and strong. And then they are given a period of time so that they can upgrade to fulfill the law. So we should not look at like we are in a wedding. Let us be in a serious wedding, and so that we can build the society, and a strong, faithful society where justice is taken at stake. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, my Lord Archbishop.
Chair,
Senator Cheptumo.
Thank you. Chair, I think the last remarks by the Bishop, it's like he was really reading my mind. But Chair, let me start by thanking the presentations of these three groups. Chair will agree with me that this is really a big step to this committee in terms of our desire to be informed so that we make some very progressive decisions in this matter. But Chair, the first comment I wanted to make is there is consensus amongst the presenters here that the Shakaola situation is purely criminal. I wish to differ because, Chair, to the extent that there was some attempts to cause death and so on, that becomes criminal. But where does the false teaching by Mackenzie and his team as to the way to go to heaven is through fasting and therefore dying, and you go to heaven? It has some element of criminal, but also religious. I think that is an area our spiritual leaders an area where we want to be a bit liberal in our thinking, so that we don't just declare this Shakaola issue as criminal. So my first question, therefore, to you is, where do you draw the distinction between criminal in the Shakaola situation and religious in terms of the teachings of Mackenzie and his pastors? That is the first point. Chair, if you read the presentation by the three groups here, they agree on one issue. In fact, the Catholic and the National Churches of the National Council of Churches of Kenya, on page 4, really agrees on self-regulation by the church. And the Catholic bishops, on page 6 of their of the presentation, recommendation 4E, also agrees to self-regulation. In fact, to them, the umbrella bodies of religious organizations in Kenya should help the government. And I think also, Chair, that was the same position taken by the Anglican Alliance of Kenya. That is okay. I want to agree with them. In fact, my brother here gave actually a structured, if you look at the presentation, Chair, because I was very keen, he's proposing two areas. One is a proposed religious regulation structure, beginning from, let me read it, beginning from the AG, Religious Freedom Commission, Christian Council, Muslim Council, Hindu Council, others. So you will be having a body that is a structured body that will deal with all this. And then in addition to that, they came up with a Religious Freedom Act, a bill in the fashion of that of 2016. And finally, Code of Conduct and Governance Guidelines for Churches in Kenya. Those are serious legal framework that can help. But my question to this is this. Whereas this is possible in a structured situation like for NCCK and for your team and for the Catholics, what will you do with these fellows who wake up one morning and they go to streets in Nairobi, in Nakuru, mobilize people during lunch hour, and start creating some charges, and in a month's time, 1 year, they have a big congregation, and they are not within the mainstream of these umbrella bodies? I think that is the challenge that I see in this proposal, which to me is looking very positive. So the question therefore is, whereas we may allow, and I think we must allow, the self-regulation by the churches, what will you do with the mushrooming churches under different names? How will you deal with that situation? That is my second question. Chair, my third question, and I really like the way the Catholic bishops made their presentation. They extensively quoted Section 32, Article 32 of the Constitution in page 2, and they quoted Article 27 on page 4 and Article 8 of the Constitution. All this speaks to freedom of association, religion, and so on. The function of the state, from where I sit as a lawyer, is to protect the lives of Kenyans and guarantees their lives also. How then will you marry that with a situation where there is infringement on the rights of a Kenyan. And I think my brother here was able to speak to that again. Article 30, is it for the chapter on Bill of Rights, Chair, to education, to health, to water, to life, you know, the entire of that particular chapter. So whereas we want to agree with you that we allow you to invoke those three articles, Article 32, Article 8, and Article 27. Is it 27? How will you now marry the two, where the state is supposed to guarantee the Kenyan people, who are actually your congregation? How will you marry that? That is my third question, Chair. And the last one is on the, this team, Chair, seems to be satisfied that the Societies Act is really a good law. But I also want them to know that the Act of Parliament of the Societies Act was enacted in 1968. It's almost as old as Kenya. It has not been amended, but according to them, it's good in registration, in regulation, accountability, and even when it comes to the registration. That law does not provide a situation where we can set qualifications for a pastor to start a church. My question, Chair, on that as I conclude is, are you agreeable to a proposal that we should set qualifications, academic, maybe not spiritual, because I don't think there is spiritual standards for, yeah, but academic qualifications for those who would want to open new churches, because I think that is where the challenge is. And so that then, again, you have the Societies Act, you have the Companies Act, the Prevention of Terrorism Act, the way they have just said. I think these are very good proposals, Chair. And that is what happened in Rwanda. So if we move the Rwanda way as a country or as a committee, do you think the church will be happy in terms of setting qualifications? How will you balance that from the natural call from heaven that I want to be a pastor? Because all my pastors today in my church, which I go to, AIC, nobody approached them to go to Bible college. They just come before the congregation, you know, do a lot of, you know, explanation. The committee in the church, led by the pastor, has set the interview that fellow, and they agree, yes, you have a call, and he goes to Bible college or begin to preach. So how do you, because, Chair, why I'm saying this is because we must be able to really be honest so that we don't accuse the state when it is in a situation that should be able to constitutionally play a role in this without appearing to be restricting and regulating and micromanaging the churches. So there are a lot of areas where there's a thin line between what should be done by government, and what should be done by the church. And so this is the flexibility which I think we need to really marry together. So I've asked a lot of questions, Chair, but I think they are very important.
My Lord Bishops, please take notes, because I'd like the Vice Chair also to say something before we pass it over to the other, and then we will go to the other senators who are online. Thank you. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. First, I would like to thank the bishops and the presenters who have done a very good job. I think we have shared a lot. They have come with very good ideas. Chair, I want us to understand that we're here because of Shakaola, and we're not here to accuse anybody, neither the churches or any religious leaders. we do understand that the Shakaola issue does not involve all the churches or any other leaders apart from Mackenzie himself and his followers. But we're here to help the country to get to the bottom of it and to ensure that this thing does not happen in future again. And that is why we have called you here to share what you think that can help us and the country to get out of this pandemic and make sure that it does not happen again. Now, having said that, I have a few questions, Chair, because we have done a few investigations here and there, and not investigation, rather we have interacted with few people. My first question is that you said, Bishop, that you had rejected the bill which was done in 2015 or 2016. Maybe you can tell us one or two reasons why you rejected that bill and where you think it was not appropriate. And another thing is how you have all talked about the freedom of worship. How do you differentiate religious freedom as provided in the Constitution vis-a-vis religious extremists, which is harmful? Yeah? Where do we draw the line? Because we know that these things exist, and that is why we are here today to see how we can work on them. And what are your views in regard to separation of church and the state? My questions are very direct, and I think they will not take much of your time. We know that there has been claims that there is money laundering in places of worship. Some religious leaders, they specialize in selling merchandise like water, healing powers, handkerchief, and those kind of things. So we need to know from you, in your view, do these organizations have the qualifications and the professionals to offer such kind of support? In your view, have some of these religious leaders taken advantage of this gap in the public health system to exploit their congregants by brainwashing and radicalizing them, giving them false hope? There are so many things which come out in this religion because, you know, when we had a meeting with the Attorney General, they told us that the Society Registrar currently holds records of about 100,000 registered societies, and approximately 40,000 are of religious nature. So you can imagine how many religions we have in place, and what do they teach? Because we know that there has to be a freedom of worship, but there is a church in America whereby people just go there naked and they say we were born naked, so we have the right to worship naked. Is that in the Bible? Are those things acceptable? So we need to draw a line somewhere to know that we should have a limit in as much as we are free to do what we want or to teach people religion and make them informed, but we need to draw a line. Where do we draw a line as religious? Because we need to help each other, yeah? Because the country is in a dilemma, and the laws are there, but people have taken advantage of our Constitution in terms of freedom of worship, yeah? So many vulnerable people seeking mental support, counseling have suffered. They have been shortchanged. So I think there are many things which have come out clearly that there's a problem. And these mushrooming religions, whereby they start somewhere in the market, tomorrow they buy their PA systems, the next day they go and rent a place, or they put a tent somewhere and they become, they register. And maybe even when we talk of degree, there's a committee whereby is supposed to be in charge of that particular religion. those all committees which should qualify for that degree, or is it one person good enough with that degree who might not be interested, would just be lured to come, we register this church, and then next time he's not even bothered. Like Mackenzie, he's kind of operating alone. He's supposed to have a committee, but those committees are not even bothered. Maybe one of them was lured for the qualification purpose, and after that, that was it. Yeah? So I think it's a lot involved in this thing, and we're not here to accuse anybody, because we know we have suffered, as religions have suffered. Even when it comes to terrorism, Islamic is kind of being put in the forefront to be seen as a religion with terrorism issues. And now this Mackenzie issue, it should not be looked as Christian being a religion whereby they are killing people, like what Mackenzie is doing. We don't need to go that way. And please, we just need your support to see how we can handle this issue and get to the bottom of it and make sure that it does not happen again. Thank you so much.
Yes, so again, my Lord Bishops, we want to hear your views. In answering the question, you also expand the views that are coming from there. Any person who can take the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I will seek to speak to some of the issues raised, and then my colleagues will also contribute. I wish to address the issues that were brought forward by the Honorable Senator. The first was on not purely criminal, that we have emphasized the fact that the Shakaola massacre was a criminal act, and therefore he is differing with us, and he asked us to demonstrate the distinction between how much does doctrine go and how much does criminality go. If you listen to the presentation of KCCB, we have talked of instrumentalization of religion, where it is true that some of the doctrinal principles that the Good News Church was based on were expanded to the extent that they actually brainwashed the Kenyans. And therefore, our idea is that the government, also in collaboration with the umbrella bodies, should be able to gauge this element of instrumentalization of religion. And that is where we said that to help us get this distinction, the state may not have the capacity, because the state has no tools, has no mechanisms to weigh which is the right doctrine and which is not the right doctrine. So we are seeking collaboration between state and church, using the umbrella bodies to be able to determine right from the registration point that this person who is coming up with a new church has the right doctrine, that this person who is coming up with a proposal of a new religious organization, the teaching is based on right tenets that will not harm the Kenyan people. And that is why we said it is good for the government to strengthen collaboration and invest with the religious organizations which have the capacity to determine what is the right tenet and what is the right tradition that has to be sold to the Kenyans. The question of self-regulation, which has come from all of us, and the EAK proposed a body, I just wish to share this, that if I may quote the Bible, Chair, there is a story told of where religious leaders, Paul and the like, were taken to the Sanhedrin, and the Sanhedrin could not determine the truth of what they were preaching. the answer the Sanhedrin gave was, let us leave it. If it is from the Holy Spirit, it will continue. If it is not, it will die. And that leads me to the question of, again, the competence of the state. The state cannot regulate matters of faith. And that is why we still say, looking at the situation where we are and the experiences we have gone through as Kenyans, we have a resource in the bodies that are organized, and my brother here pointed to a historical time when mushrooming of churches could not happen, because reference, there was even communication between state and our bodies before a church was registered, before a new religious organization was registered. Because with this collaboration, then these umbrella bodies are able to tell, this is right teaching, these are right tenets, and all in the interest of the Kenyan people. Otherwise, if we talk of a government body appointed by government, obviously we are touching on the principle of separation of powers. And obviously we shall be vesting these powers in a person or structure that may not have the tools to determine the right tenets and the right doctrine. With regard to the articles that were quoted in our presentations, it was not only KCCB, even NCCK referred to some of those articles of the Constitution. The question of the Honorable Senator was, up to what point does the freedom of religion touch on the other freedoms, especially the Bill of Rights? And that is a very pertinent question, Chair. As I said, on our part, I demonstrated that our tenets, the tradition upon which the church is built, promotes common good, promotes integral development of the human person. And if we are not wrong, the faith communities have actually contributed to the formulation of the Bill of Rights because of what they stand for. My problem is that as the churches continue carrying out their mission, there was a discussion here about what happens when a church changes from what it was registered and starts propagating other teachings. My position around that is, this should not be the reason to touch the freedom of religion. The freedom of religion being respected, the concern of the Registrar of Societies and the Act should be, if this religious organization wants to be registered, how much does its foundational papers, documents, promote the Bill of Rights? That would be the question at the registration point. And in terms of follow-up, my brother, Dr. Makanda, said, we have an elaborate system of registering, incorporating these members, and even following up to see what they preach and what they do. We have mechanisms of peer correction. So what happens after registration then brings us back to the question of collaboration between state and the umbrella bodies to ensure that what we registered is what we stand for. Because the temptation is there, and I agree with you. I may start a church today, and tomorrow, sorry to say, maybe because of the influence of society, influence of some powerful people, I get attracted to money. And therefore I start selling what the Honorable Senator is talking about. That becomes now the role of the umbrella bodies to say, are we still on track? But also, the security agencies of government have a role. Listen to the concern of the religious leaders that when Mackenzie started showing deviant indications, reports were made, but the corrective agencies did not take action. So that would be our stand. About qualifications, I would be very reluctant that we go the Rwanda way, because I am a church lawyer by background, and I think religions are based on faith and tenets of faith, not academic qualifications. If we make religion an academic endeavor, I think Kenya will be taking a wrong path. I would rather we go the way of what does this religious organization stand for, how much does it promote the common good, and how much do the tenets support the common good.
So that I can get you clear,
Yeah.
you will not be comfortable with a recommendation from this committee saying that you need to have a degree in theology or a certificate of theology or diploma in theology for you to qualify to register a church or any organization like a church?
Chair, with all respect, I wouldn't go that way. And I liken this to the discussion in the political arena, where we have, as Kenyans said, some of us are born leaders. We don't need papers, but that is a point of discussion. We don't need to discuss that. And so what I'm saying is, I would rather emphasize on doctrine and tenets.
Chair, through you,
Yes.
I would wish the remaining two groups to give their comment on that particular issue.
On that issue.
Yeah.
Yes,
qualification.
I'm giving my opinion.
Yeah, you're right. That
Yeah.
we are collecting all views.
Yeah.
There's no right or wrong opinion.
Okay.
But we want you to help us so that when we are making our recommendation, we can have a broad perspective.
Yeah.
Thank you. So you are saying it for you, it is the
For
doctrine.
me, I wouldn't go
The doctrine and whatever.
degree
Not
element.
the doctrine.
Yeah.
Okay, I see. I
Okay.
see.
I wish, as I conclude, to also comment on the question of separation of powers between state and church. Because if I'm not wrong, it came specifically from the Catholic KCCB presentation. The thinking is this. That principle is very clear that in matters doctrine and faith, state has no competence. In the common activities, issues justice and peace, issues education, these are the common areas of collaboration. The two have a role to play in a collaborative manner. And basically what KCCB is saying is, since the issue of Shakaola has had this nuance of a religious perspective, if it is to be settled, let us distinguish matters of faith, matters of doctrine, and leave it to the right realm in terms of jurisdiction. Matters faith, doctrine are not the competence of the state. Where it touches criminal acts that touch on other rights, those are matters that the state and church can collaborate. That is what we meant by that. Thank you, Chair.
I must say that we all know that the Catholic priests, they go through a lot of training before you start ministering. So I must say that coming from your statement about we shouldn't emphasize too much on qualification to start a church, it's a very strong statement coming from the Catholic group. Yes.
Yeah, Chair, I don't want to be misunderstood.
Yes.
I belong to a diocese in this country where the bishop used to say, to have one ignorant priest is worse than having 10 intelligent devils.
Yes. But you still think that
But I still say,
what should be emphasized
I still
is the
say
doctrine.
what should be emphasized in registration
Yes.
and admission of activities
Church.
of the church
Yeah.
is more of the mission based on doctrine and tenets.
Instead of the qualification of
not
the individuals who are registering.
They say Lucifer was a very intelligent angel.
Thank you. Let me yield to any other. Yes, yes.
Chair, I can
General
comment.
Secretary.
We enjoyed ourselves with the comments from KCCB with regard to the state enforcing an academic requirement for faith leaders in the country in the way of Rwanda. First of all, we want to express ourselves that Rwanda is not a country that we should measure ourselves against when it comes to democracy or state capabilities. I think, and I don't want to go into details of some of the policies that they carry out, not just on the faiths, but also on other organizations, and especially the political leaders in that country. I'm sure senators here wouldn't like to be senators in Rwanda. Number two, NCSK is also of the view that imposing high or degree as requirements for someone to run a church or to become an MCA or become a senator, we have not reached that level. I don't have the statistics now, but how many people in this country have degrees? The last time I checked, it was 3%.
Chair, just a moment. Sorry.
Allow Senator to say
sorry,
something.
SG. It is not just a high degree of qualification, Chair. I think something about education generally. It could be a certificate, it could be a diploma, it could be a degree, master. So I think it should be discussed generally in terms of qualification rather than maybe a high-level degree or something like that. I was just trying to capture what you say, so that we make it. Do we attach some academic qualifications to this, or we just allow the spirit and?
With that qualification or clarification, do you agree with his proposal? Archbishop will come to you. Don't know.
Yes. So let me make my final comment. So obviously you want a church leader or a pastor or any religious leader normally are very educated. I wanted to dispel from this committee the notion that if Mackenzie had a degree in theology, that it would have prevented Shakaola from happening. That's a philosophical question. I don't think it would have. Perhaps it would have been worse. So if we enforce a requirement for degrees, then a lot of religious places where people don't have those degrees for one reason or the other will not necessarily be running. But I think every faith, like for example the Anglican Church where I come from, there's a code and there's a certain level of academic qualification. And most of it is reading and writing and capacity to understand. But when it comes to religion, doctrine is the real deal. And doctrine is taught. And the leaders must be at a higher level than the people they are leading. What I wouldn't like the government to do is to enforce it across the board for all the faiths in this country in a way that would actually create a challenge in enforcement and in expression of the freedom of worship. And I think it's not the problem that we are looking at. The real problem we are looking at is extreme indoctrination, where someone preaches a doctrine that violates the Bill of Rights, violates the right to education, violates the right to life, violates even the right to freedom of worship itself. I think that's the problem that we are dealing with. And I think the committee needs to address itself to that. And that is why we are thinking we can help the government in a big way, because we know them. We know them. Mackenzie, for example, has been challenged by our church leaders in Malindi many times, and even questioned on what he was preaching. We were running a big program with the Ministry of Interior, and this matter came up for discussion with GAO officers and the children's officers. So it was known. It was, people were aware of. I think Senator Cheptumo asked a very critical question. What happens if a religious organization violates the Bill of Rights or the rights of others, like happened in this case? There, obviously what the faith leaders can do is to bring it up, to do the peer review, which we have indicated. There is also the bringing of this information to the state organs, which in this case for Mackenzie, for example, was done. And I think we don't want to apportion blame. The criminal justice system in this country, where violations of any right are recorded, there must be a remedy. And I think the remedies are there. And I think we need to move towards those remedies. So people like Mackenzie, what should be done to them? I think it's you, the chairman, who asked about that. When a crime is done, there should be justice for the victims. It is very horrifying to watch some of the children who are being removed, and to even know that most of the people who are buried are actually children, taken there by their parents in search of faith. So those are very serious violations, and at the end of the day, the state has the framework for the criminal justice system. The issue that was asked by Senator, I can't remember her name, is where do we draw the line between the freedom of religion and the freedoms, the other freedoms? I mean, where is the end of the freedom of religion? Our Bill of Rights is very vibrant, and we keep priding ourselves with it. But with freedom comes responsibility. The more the freedom, the more the responsibility. We are free to worship, but we also have a responsibility. And that is why, for example, as NCSK, we have a framework for all our member churches to make sure that they do not violate the rights of other people and they follow the doctrine. That responsibility must be ascertained somewhere within the religious organization itself, because there should be a framework within it. It should also be within the umbrella. Some of it obviously with the state because of registration and so on through the registrar of societies. And then all of us are subject to the courts and the rest of the justice system. So I think if these responsibilities are put in different places where they fall, then we are going to have a vibrant religious sector. I don't think it is wrong, Senator, for there to be 40,000